I'm an explorer and a gear geek. I'm always on the lookout for what's the best piece of kit for any given task. If something isn't doing it for me, it's gone. I've tried a lot of gear. I'm not a collector. Everything I have has a role in either my music making or music playing workflows. Because of this, I've developed some very strong opinions on what I like and don't like, what works for me and doesn't, and what's worth spending my money on and earning a place in my world. These impressions come from the perspective of a working live electronic music performer and music producer, regularly releasing tracks and performing internationally for the past 15 plus years. This is not a deep dive technical tutorial. I watched Loop Hop and Red Beans Recording and Cuckoo and Dave Mack and EasyBot for those, just like I'm sure you all do. This series is about sharing my opinions and insights from using the gear to actually produce and perform music professionally, in the hope that they'll help you make better decisions on what will work best for you. These are my thoughts on the Elektron Octatrack. Why not get started with one of the most loved and probably also most anxiety-inducing pieces of kit that exists for making music out there. When people think about the Octatrack, they tend to fall into three different categories. Either you love it and it can do no wrong and everything is perfect and it's absolutely the most amazing thing, or you hate it and then you start to list off all of its shortcomings that it has, of which there are a ton of shortcomings actually. Or three, you've never tried it because you're completely intimidated by it. What we're going to talk about today is my personal opinion on it and how I use it, what I love about it, what I don't like about it and wish that it had or wish that it did, who it's for and who it's not for. This is not going to be a tutorial. It's not going to be a deep dive. These are my thoughts on the Elektron Octatrack. So what were my initial thoughts? Before I got the Octatrack and I didn't know what it was and didn't know how it was going to be or if I was going to like it, I was intimidated by it. I think as everyone is. I was nervous that there was going to be too many manuals and programming and all of that stuff for making music. I also felt like there was probably going to be way too much to learn before I could even make music, that I was going to have to learn a ton and, absorb this entire manual before I could even have it make a sound. On the positive side, before I had the Octatrack, I was certain that it was going to solve every problem that I had. I was sure that it did everything amazingly. I was under the impression that it probably was not going to have any limitations at all, and that it would basically be a DAW in a box that would allow me to not be tied down to my computer, and it would be just like having a DAW but in a separate piece of gear. And I think I can safely say that I was completely wrong on pretty much everything that I assumed before I got the Octatrack. So let's start off with my likes about the Octatrack. First and foremost, I love the customizability, meaning that, the Octatrack is to hardware, groovebox effects processors, system brains. It is to those things what modular is to synthesizers. There are pieces and parts within this that can be mixed and matched and used in all sorts of different ways or not used. And I think that's a really, really important part that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. It can all be customized to your workflow. Where that's really different is a lot of other pieces of equipment that are out there have their particular workflow, and you have to work that way. You have to work within it. And granted, there is a bit of that when you're setting up the Octatrack, but you can set it up to work in any way that you want. You're not bound to a certain set of functions that are always there even if you don't want them, and that are never there when you do. Next, I really love the flexibility. I can use it for different things in different scenarios. So right now I have it set up as kind of the central performance mixer of my hardware setup. But if I want to take this and use it as a groove box, I can do that. If I want to chop and edit samples, I can have it do that. I can use it to program drums and record them into my DAW. And it can be a lot of different things at different times, depending on what you need it for. I also really love it for the unique feature combination. There are a lot of pieces of gear out there that will do things that the Octatrack does, but there is nothing else out there that has this unique combination of features. It can be a customizable effects unit. It can be a mixer for multiple pieces of external gear. It can be a sequencer of other gear. It can have different loopers within it, listening to different things at the same time. It has the programmable crossfader, which can be, basically set up with scenes to do really anything you want. It can be set up to grab a loop or do an effect or switch to a different sound or change complete parameters or do all sorts of things based on the scenes that you assign to it. It can be an amazing sequencer, and it can also be a sampler and sample player and sample editor and sample chopper. A lot of machines can do a lot of those things, and a lot of them can do multiples of those things, but I have yet to see anything that does this particular unique combination of features. The next to one of my likes, and I mentioned this before in passing, but I really love the fact that it adapts to me, where if I pick up a particular piece of gear, let's say I get an MPC or a Deluge or something like that, there's a particular way that works, and it always works that way. And if there's functions that you will never ever use, you don't have any choice but to have them right there, where you have to get through them sometimes to get to other functions. You can't switch it up and make it the exact functionality that you want for your personal workflow. The Octatrack is not that at all. It adapts to me. So if in this case, for example, I have this working as a mixer, an effects unit, and a looper. This isn't playing any samples. It isn't sequencing anything. It isn't doing, and none of those things are getting in the way. I can use any of these tracks for any of the things that I want to use them for. Where in a lot of other pieces of gear, you have to sacrifice one to get the other, or you're set to certain tracks are MIDI, certain tracks are audio, where the Octatrack is completely flexible to adapt to my particular workflow, whatever that is. So what my workflow is going to be totally different from yours, and that's great because you can set it up and use it in any way that you choose to use it. Another one of the likes, and I can't talk about any Electron piece of gear without talking about the sequencer. Now, there are a lot of powerful sequencers out there, and there have been a couple of recent sequencers that are standalone sequencer units, like the Hapex and the Squid, which are powerful, and they do their own things, and they do some pretty amazing things. As far as a piece of equipment that is not just a sequencer, but can also make sounds and edit sounds and have other sounds coming in and out, there's nothing else out there that has a sequencer that's anywhere near as powerful as this. And now I know that's going to be controversial because everybody's in love with their particular piece of gear and its particular sequencer, but being able to parameter lock every step in your sequence and lock anything on the face of this basically in that step and have it completely change during that one step is wildly powerful. So for example, if I have a trigger here, if I have a step here within the source menu, I have 6 different functions that I can edit. I can edit the level, I can edit all sorts of things here. Then in the amp, I have 5 different things that I can edit. The LFO, I've got 6. Then in the first effects page, I've got 5. In the second effect, I've got 6, kind of depending on what effect you've got on there. Every single one of those parameters, so for example, this effect on this particular step is a delay. So I can lock the time, the feedback, the volume, the bass and width, so basically kind of like filtering it, the lower end and the higher end of the filtering it, and how much is sent as far as the send to a delay effect. And I can lock every one of those parameters differently on every single step of a 64-step sequence. Being able to do that on every channel to every parameter on every step is amazingly powerful. Now, talking about the sequencer, a lot of people are intimidated by the Elektron sequencers if they haven't used them from the start, and they're actually quite simple to use to get going at the beginning. And this was one of the misconceptions that I had, was that it was going to be really difficult to get started with the Octatrack. But the reality is these 16 steps across the bottom, and then the 4 pages that you can go to get to 64 steps, is just like on any sequencer. It's just like the sequencer on a 909 drum machine. It's just like the sequencer on, any of the roll-in boxes, the TR8, any of those. So you can just program in steps as you want them. You know, if I want a step on each, on every downbeat, I can just hit record, put a step on each downbeat. It's not complicated to get started. However, because the sequencer is so deep, it is very complicated to kind of get to the end. It's like one of those video games that never ends. You can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I've had this for a couple years now, and I learn new things every single time I sit down with it. Every time I try something else, every time I watch a new tutorial video on it, I'm blown away by something new that I didn't even know that it could do, and I can add that in the next time. Once you learn that baseline with the sequencer, it just gets better and better over time as you learn more things. Now, I mentioned this before, but the crossfader and being able to have scenes here is also another thing that I really love about this. The way I use this as a performance mixer, and I use this template that was created by another YouTuber, EasyBot. Shout out to him, and I'll link to him down in the description. He made this template of how to use this as a performance mixer. So every one of these 16 buttons is a different effect, and that's what I have written on the tape down here. So if I want to assign an effect to this side of the fader, so let's say a high pass filter of the whole thing, I just push B, high pass, and then when I fade across, it's a high pass. Then let's say I want A to be a side chain pumping effect. So when I fade back, the high pass is gone and the pumping effect is in. Basically, it's set up so that again, you can customize every single thing on this fader, and you can use it any way you want. So for example, if I take a loop on track 7, which is set up to be a looper, once I do that, if I go to all and then I fade across, it's just playing that loop of all of the inputs of the whole system. So it mutes everything else the way this is set up, and so that I can change different parameters in my live set while that loop is playing, and then I can fade across to what's new. Being able to customize and set it up like that's great, and if you don't ever want to use that, you're not stuck doing it that way. If that doesn't work for your workflow, make each one of these something different, or never use them at all. But it's completely up to you how you customize this machine, and that's what makes it really special. All right, so now let's get to the dislikes. It's not perfect. I'll tell you right away, it's not perfect. There's plenty of things, plenty of shortcomings. First and foremost, choice can be overwhelming. You know, like when you go into the store and there's 100 different options for something and you're just not sure what to get. There's so many different ways to use this that it took me months to weed out all of the things that I didn't want to use it for, all of the things that that didn't fit into my workflow. I had to get over the fact that I was like, wow, this can do all these things. I have to use them all. The reality is that you don't have to use everything that's here. Another one of the dislikes, and I shouldn't say this is a dislike because as I mentioned before, this is it comes with the territory of something that's so deep, but it is difficult to set up. There is a lot of diving through menus and setting parameters and setting things up exactly the way that you want them in order to make this work exactly the way you want it to work. As I mentioned, that comes with the territory of something that does so much. It would be super easy to set up if it only did 3 things. But this literally does hundreds of things in hundreds of ways. So of course it's deep, and of course it takes a long time to set up, but that is definitely a dislike. For those of you that are already in the Electron world or that are looking into the Electron world, you've probably heard of Overbridge. Another one of the dislikes about the Octatrack is that the Octatrack predates Overbridge. This has been out for over 10 years now, and it wasn't built with the capability to interact with Overbridge. So all of the modern Electron boxes can use Overbridge, and it's absolutely amazing if you're connecting to a computer or to a DAW, but the Octatrack does not. And so that is definitely one of the drawbacks. From what I understand from everybody that I've talked to that's in the Electron world, it will never have Overbridge capability because it would have had to have been written, the software is written totally different for this than it is for all of the other units. They all kind of share a common core of information and databases, and this does not. It's a totally different software. And finally, on my list of dislikes is because it is over 10 years old, it does have a lack of some of the modern functionality that comes in a lot of other machines. For example, USB connectivity is really lacking. There is USB connectivity for loading samples and loading templates and saving things like that, but you don't have MIDI or audio over USB. The other thing is that I would love, and I wish that it would have, but none of the Electron boxes do, and I wish that they all would, is USB host, to be able to connect a controller or keyboard or something like that to it. None of them do, and I wish that they all did. So Electron, if you're listening on your Mark IIs and IIIs of your different pieces of gear, please add in USB host capability and keep us from having to use those USB host boxes. Because machines like the Octatrack are so deep with their menus, I tend to like to use them with controllers. I've often used the Launch Control XL to control the 8 tracks of the Octatrack, and just for things as simple as volume, so that you're not having to go track 1 level, track 2 level, track 3 level, but you can actually push multiple levels at the same time. So being able to have a USB host and connect things like that would be super helpful. Now we'll talk a little bit about how I use it. Now we already have discussed this quite a bit, but just to kind of review, I use it as a performance mixer. All of the audio from all of these machines is being summed through the Digitone and Digitact, and then the orange cables coming in is a stereo input on the right side, on the C and D inputs of the Octatrack. The yellow cables are coming from the Digitact, and that's another stereo input on the A and B side. I'm also using it as a multi-effects unit. As I mentioned, every one of the tracks, the through machines that these are coming through, have effects on them, as does the master, and then those are, you know, kind of twisted and manipulated thanks to this template that was made by EasyBot in order to come up with some really great performance effects. So it is a multi-effects unit as well. It's also being used as a live looper. As I mentioned, 3 of the tracks over here are all set up to be listening at all times to different things. One is set up to listen to the A and B inputs, the other is set up to listen to the C and D inputs, and the other is set up to listen to the master internally. So if I choose to hit this and hit yes, that arms this track, and then it's automatically creating a perfect 4-bar loop, and then I can fade across and play that loop, have that come out with nothing else playing while I mess with everything else. Now it also has a cue out and headphone out, so you can hook headphones into the cue out, and then you can cue the different sides that those buffers are listening to, so you can cue up your next track just like you would with a DJ mixer, using that. And so I can be cueing these in the background, figuring out what I'm going to come up with next, because my sets are all improvised. And then when I've got everything set up the way I want it for the next track, then I can fade this back across from the live loop to, from the loop to the live sounds that are coming out of it. The other thing that I do use this for in this particular setup is the master clock. I like to be able to start and stop everything from here, from my kind of central piece of gear. It is not quite as stable as some of the other boxes. In the past, I used the Digitact as the master clock, but I moved it over here because I do just kind of prefer to use this so that I can get it sent out to all the other pieces of gear that I have here. Now let's talk about also how I don't use it. Now, people are going to be going, but it does this, but it does this. Yeah, absolutely. It does way more than I use, and I'm sure way more than I will ever use. I can't imagine anyone ever using all of it all the time. There's no use case, I think, where that's even possible to use everything that this does all at the same time. So you have to kind of pick and choose. So how I don't use this, I don't use it as a sampler other than the live looper. So I'm not sampling on it. I am not using it as a sample editor. It has the ability to chop samples and play slices, and you can assign slices to different steps in your sequence and all that stuff. I'm not doing any of that with it. In this particular setup, I'm not using it as a sequencer at all. As much as I love the sequencer in this, I'm using the Electron sequencers in the other 2 boxes, but I'm not actually sequencing anything with this in this particular setup. The Digitone and the Digitact are each sequenced internally, as is the Swarm and the black box. I like the ability to have each piece of gear independent of the other pieces of gear so that I can have that customizability while I'm playing. Some people like to have one control the other, which is great. Set it up that way. Have your dig attack set up so that it sends program changes and all that kind of stuff. I just don't particularly have that set up that way. I'm also not, as you can see, using this as a groove box. It can be a standalone piece of gear for sure. You can load in drum samples, you can load in loops, you can load in all kinds of sounds, you can manipulate those. I've seen some really cool videos where because you can parameter lock individual slices of a longer sample to individual steps, you can sample in a whole bunch of drum hits into one individual sample, slice it on each one of those hits, and let's say the first slice is the kick drum in your sample. You can have your 1, 5, 9, and 13 play slice 1, while 3, 7, 11, and 15 play slice 5, which is an open hi-hat on the offbeat. And you can do that all in one track, which is really pretty cool, but I am not using it to do that. Another thing that the Octatrack is really great for, but I am not using it this way, is as a drum machine. It can be, as can any of these pieces of gear, any of them can be a drum machine. They can be your kind of rhythm section of what you're doing, but I'm not using this again to sequence anything or produce any sounds other than the playback of the live loop that this takes sometimes during my sets. So who is the Octatrack good for? Well, first and foremost, it's good for gear nerds. I am a gear nerd. I'm the first one to say it. I love to learn new stuff. And if you love to learn, if you love the process of learning gear, this is the piece of gear for you, because you will never ever run out of things to learn. It's the video game you'll never get to the end of. Going along with that, if you are a manual reader, this is for you. I know people that like to sit down for fun and read manuals. If that's you, this is absolutely for you. This not only has its own manual, but it's actually had manuals that have been produced by other people that you can get off the internet, some that are paid, some that are free, but there's so much to know and so much to learn that the actual manual isn't enough. So multiple other people have written their own manuals. So if you like manual reading, this is for you. I would also say that the Octatrack is for people who like to customize. If you are into modulars for synthesis and you want a controller, control box, mixer, effects unit, you're gonna love this, because you can customize this just like you can with a modular synthesizer. Or if you're into customizing your individual gear or making your own sounds or things like that, this is all of that, but for the kind of controller, mixer, effects, sampler, looper world. So it's all customizable. Another person or group of people that this is for is live performers. So as you can see, this is the central piece of gear for my live set, and I think it's ideally suited for performing live. It is a very performative piece of gear. The programmable Crossfader does more for that performance than anything else, but also the fact that it can be a central mixer. So all of those things make it very much a great central brain for a live performance setup. So now, who's it not good for? I would put right at the top of that list people who are new to music making with hardware. It is deep. It does a lot of things. You would never outgrow it, but at the same time, it would be difficult to wrap your head around a lot of the things that this does if it was your first piece of hardware. I would say once you've gotten your head around synthesis and sampling and sample manipulation and effects and how they work, and sound editing and how that works, and LFOs and modulation and how that works, and sequencers and how those work, I would say then move on to something that does all of those things at the same time and has all of those different moving parts. If you want to learn the Electron sequencer as your first sequencer to learn, I would say definitely go with something like the DTAC, because you're going to learn a lot of the same workflow things that the Octatrack can do. They're not quite identical, but they're very, very similar. And without having all of the other stuff, this is much more immediate and this is much more flexible and customizable. Somebody else that this is not for is people who don't need customization. There's other people that are out there that love a particular workflow. I have friends that have been working on the Machina workflow for a long time, and when they came out with the Machina Plus, that just became their central piece of hardware that they use for live performance and for things like that, because they're used to that particular workflow. They aren't looking for a customizable workflow. They don't need a particularly new way to do it. They found what they needed with that box. I would also say someone else that this is not for is people who don't need the capabilities of what it does. It would be kind of a waste of money to spend the amount of money you're going to spend on an Octatrack if you were just going to use it as a sequencer. You could spend half as much on a used Digitone and get just as powerful a sequencer that's probably much easier to use and does a lot of the same stuff that would fit much more with your style of work if that was all you needed. And finally, I would say a group of people that this is definitely not for is people who are impatient, who need something immediate. Now, I know friends of mine, I've seen other people on YouTube, and they say, I have to be able to sit down and just get it right away and start making music right away, or else it's not a piece of gear for me. If that's you and you're not patient and want to learn and dig deep and read manuals and study and figure out and customize, if you just want it to be immediate and easy and you're not patient about it, this is definitely not the piece of gear for you. Sum up, final thoughts on the Octatrack. It is complex and deep, and it takes a long time to learn and get proficient. Anything this deep is going to have a super steep learning curve. It is important to note that not everything needs to be learned all at once. Take things in little steps, take things in little bites, learn something, get good at it, build on it, and learn something new. It's like getting a new piece of gear every day. Keep in mind also that not everything on the Octatrack needs to be learned. There's certain things in here that I don't use and will probably never use, so I haven't taken the time to learn them. But if ever I get that itch, they're there for me to learn. I could not perform as I do with my live setup without the Octatrack. There is not another piece of gear out there that could do in one unit this size what this does. Because of that, the Octatrack is totally unique and it's untouchable as far as I'm concerned. There are plenty of instruments out there that do everything that the Octatrack does and even better, but none of them combine all of these functionalities into one unit. There are plenty of units out there that sample better, that mix better, that do better effects, that sequence better or easier. Plenty of units can do all of those things, but there's nothing out there with this combination of capabilities and flexibility and form factor all in one unit. The Octatrack, in the world of the thousands of pieces of music making hardware that there are out there, is totally unique, and I will never get rid of mine. Thanks for watching this video, and if you liked what you got out of it, give it a like and a thumbs up so that we excite the algorithm just a little bit, and leave a comment down in the comments below on how you use the Octatrack or questions that you have about the Octatrack, and I always try to do my best to answer every question that people send in. So if I know the answer, I will definitely pass that on, and if not, I will send you over to one of the people that are far better at this unique piece of gear than I am. Thanks so much for choosing to spend a little time with me, and I'll see you next Wednesday for the next My Thoughts. Take care of each other.